I just think that's super fascinating. Like, and I think it's something that would be super cool to see in more places. I'm like, man, that sounds fun to me. Not only the getting to farm in a way that's different, but also getting to pour money into a community that might really need it. Okay, guys, welcome back to another episode of the Serve Ag podcast. So this is episode 2. This might be number 3 that you're hearing now. I don't have a guest with me today. It's just me, but I kind of wanted to use this as a place for me to also review books or media in regards to agriculture. And I probably about 3 weeks ago wrapped up Will Harris's book, A Bold Return to Giving a Damn. And that is kind of, I don't even know the best way to describe it. It's primarily a regenerative agriculture book, but it's also kind of a story slash like a roadmap for more direct to consumer farming, more direct to consumer selling. And it's kind of just Will Harris's story of how he built his company into what it is today and built his farm into what it is today. And so I absolutely devoured it. There's very few books that I read that I didn't read this. I listened to the audiobook version, which if you have Spotify Premium, you guys can all go listen to it right now for free because Spotify has audiobooks now. That's pretty great. But the book just like it was done. It was written in such a way that was, it's in the title. It was bold. And I really appreciated that. I do not agree with everything that Will Harris, practices farm wise or he says about industrial agriculture in general. But with that said, I do respect him a lot. And that's something I really want to emphasize after reading this book. A lot of people in the regenerative agriculture community are kind of rudely preachy about their practices and typically will tear down others for the way they farm. And so I won't share too much of my stance and all that. I'm just a big fan of people being nice to each other and being a little bit nicer to each other in general, especially in the agriculture community. And so when someone goes and openly bashes other farmers for the way they farm without first trying to understand why they do what they do, that really does not sit well with me. And so going into any sort of book like this isn't the only book I've read. There's a couple a pastoral songs one. That's one written by a guy from England. He's a sheep farmer. His second book after his first one was just like, let me just tear down everything bad about industrial agriculture, blah, 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 all this. Phenomenal book, super well written. Really enjoyed listening to that one as well. His first book, A Shepherd's Life, is probably one of my favorite books ever written. But anyways, this isn't about that book. This is about Will Harris's book. So I'll get back to that. The book starts out kind of just giving a nice summary of the entire book itself and what it was going to entail. I really liked that portion. Also, Will Harris narrates it himself, which is, if you ever want to listen to an old cowboy narrate an audiobook, this is a great book to listen to. But he starts out kind of talking about where he was, how he got to where he is now. He has that overview, and then he goes into more detail about it. And then throughout the book kind of sparsons different facts or different things that he, views industrial agriculture as. And I think it is just a phenomenally well-written book. And it is also very timely published. It was just recently written. Well, not written. It was just recently published within the past 2 months. So this is, as I'm recording this is January 2nd, 2024. So it just came out last fall. I think anyone who wants to get creative with the way they farm or wants to get creative with the way their farm brings in money needs to listen to this book. I thoroughly enjoyed listening to how Will transitioned his, century farm operation that he took over from his dad, who took it over from his grandpa, transitioned this very traditional farm model into a fully regenerative model, but also a fully direct-to-consumer model or a fully direct wholesale model, basically not just taking it to market. And I think I'm super fascinated by those business models. And I'll add a caveat, and he'll admit this in the book. He came into transitioning with more cash in his pocket than some farmers I know or some ranchers I know, as well as he was a fully industrial guy. You listen to the book, and it is just super cool hearing him talk about the way he viewed things and the way he transitioned out of industrial ag because of what he saw. And so once again, I try to be as neutral as I can on the topic. If I were to farm, I would actually probably practice regenerative practices, just because it's like, if I'm starting out, I'm going to put all this labor and investment in. I want to try what this new religion of farming that everyone's kind of toting out there. With that said, I'm not going to go around and start bashing industrial agriculture. Cheap food has its place. How healthy that food is for you. I mean, Neil at Hazel Creek and I have talked about this more than a few times. Like, hey, cheap food has its place. We know it's not as nutritious as it should be, and as well as large food processors probably are quite profit hungry, if we're being totally honest. I mean, I try to eat as healthily as I can on the budget I can, and honestly, that's not that much money. And so we still buy a lot of processed food, and I don't love it all the time. I'll be honest about that. With that said, back to my main point from earlier, I don't think industrial agriculture is the enemy not we all, a lot of media and certain folks within the agriculture community make it out to be. You can't just tear down you can't just tear down a system and expect the world to be okay with this massive system such as food that they're trying to tear down. There needs to be a transition plan if we're going to do it their way. And so that's kind of where that's kind of where my beef kind of comes in with all that. With that said, back to the book, Will Harris does an excellent job weaving. Is like, hey, this was not an easy transition for him. I mean, he starts back in the 90s, early 2000s, trying to do all this stuff back before, anyone was thinking about selling meat online. It was something that they were trying to figure out and trying to do well. So super, super good book. If you are interested in farm models like that, I would highly recommend it. But even in general, Will Harris is not someone I agree with entirely, but he is someone I respect deeply. That's something I think our culture has kind of lost today. I don't agree with everything he says in this book, but I do agree with him being a bold, outspoken person about what he believes. And he's also not a jerk about it. And that's what I really appreciated about it. It wasn't just him like continuing to like bash. Oh, industrial ag this, or feedlot this, blah. Like he was very tactful about it, in a way that I think a lot of people on the internet aren't. And because of that, being a bold person myself, I really respect him being able to do that. I think it's a great book. A lot of people should read. What else did I think about it? I think it was probably about, was it 9 hours long? Here, let me just look. I can just look this up. Beauty of being on my computer. So, I'll just grab my phone. But yeah, it was a phenomenal book that I would highly recommend you reading. Give me 3 seconds. This is the hard part about podcasting by yourself. You don't have anyone to fill this empty space, but it was 10 hours long. So I listened to it through half of a snow plowing session. So I was plowing snow at about 1 a.m. So I listened to 5-6 hours of it there. And then the next day I did as much work as I could that was allowing me to focus on listening to the book so I could finish it. So all that said, great book. I think we need more people willing to speak their opinions in a way that was tactful the way he did. I'm looking at his website right now, and I think Will does a really good job of speaking why regenerative agriculture is great and not why industrial agriculture is as horrible as some people make it out to be. I think that's needed. We need more people willing to highlight why what they do is so good on its own, rather than just constantly bashing something on its own. And I've said this before when it comes to marketing, like, your marketing is not good marketing if it only can function when you are tearing someone else down. I mean, I was listening to a political ad on the news this morning while I was at the gym, and I was just like, man, this entire platform, and I won't say who it was, this entire platform is based on them tearing down someone else. That's the only ground they have. I don't know anything about their policy. I don't know what they've done, what they're gonna do. It's just like, the other person sucks, vote for me. It's like, that's not a good stance. That's not good marketing. And so Will Harris does a really good job of like striking that balance. Like, hey, like, this is why regenerative agriculture is so great and the beauty I've seen from it. And he transitions that in a way to, hey, here's something maybe you should think about or you should try, in a really tactful way. So I'm going to keep saying that word tactful because Will is a very bold, old, grumpy cowboy, but he does it so well, and I appreciate that so much about that. So Will, if you ever listen to this, I really appreciate the way you handled these conversations. I don't think a lot of people, specifically within the regenerative agriculture space, handle those conversations as well as you do. You you did it in a way that made me want to keep listening to you, and that is something that's really important. So I'm gonna take a break, catch my breath real quick, and then I'll be right back. So now I kind of want to get into the business model that Will Harris and White Oak Pastures has been able to achieve, and I think this is something that is super fascinating, and something I'm like, man, like in my ideal world, this is something we see everywhere because I think it's just a really cool model. And someone who spends a lot of time in rural communities, I think this is something that rural communities could really benefit from. So I'm on their website right now. I will put the screen recording up here. We'll just go straight to their homepage. I think this is their homepage. Okay, so got his book right on the front, but he goes into artisan goods. So artisan goods would be, we'll just go to the page. All these things: sausages, gourmet grinds, seasonings, bone broth, jars, preserves, jerky. Okay, lots of good stuff. I mean, and then you go into grass-fed beef, grass-fed lamb, heritage pork, Arabica pork. Ooh, I've never had any of that. That sounds pretty good. But anyways, we go into a shop front. Okay, look at all this. Look at all these different things he's able to sell on his store locally and at large through shipping. I mean, that's just super cool. And if you listen to the book, he goes into that too. He's been able to, all the way regenerative farming works, and specifically when it comes to like intensive rotational grazing or raising vegetable crops, it is very labor intensive. And so that is something that I always hear is like, we just don't have the people to farm that way. I mean, you go to some vegetable farms either down south or on the West Coast, and it is still a lot of migrant labor doing that labor every day because it is hard work. I mean, I've met some migrant laborers who will, I mean, they just work. They work like no other. And it can be done. But I think the beauty of what Will has done is Will has taken all that money he could be paying H-2A workers, migrant laborers, to do all this very hard, very physically laborsome work, like moving cows on a daily basis, on a several hour basis. I mean, that's a lot of work, when it comes to harvesting vegetables and things like that. He takes that money and he pours it back into his community. And that's something I think is super cool. He takes the money that could be spent on migrant labor, or it could be spent, on what we would spend in the industrial community on equipment or fences or all, the list goes on. And you can pour that money back into a community of folks who might not have a college education, who might need, might work a physically laborsome job for the rest of their life. And you can do this in a local community that quote unquote is dying. I mean, I think almost every small town in America now has a Dollar General. What happens when Dollar General, starts to automate their sales checkout process? Okay, we're losing a few jobs there. We've talked about truck driving before, long haul truck driving. It's not going to be automated probably in the next 5 or 6 years, but maybe in the next 10 to 15, there's going to be people who reside in these small towns who rely on things that are laborsome and a little bit more monotonous, and they love that job. It's great. I'm not bashing that at all. But that is probably going to get automated at some point in the near future. And so we're going to have this labor pool popping up in the next decade or so that is going to need more work to do, that's not sitting at a desk like I am right now, but actually producing something, hard goods with their hands. I think this is where the resilient farm model that Will talks about in his book could really start to take shape. There's so many small towns that are struggling to keep people in small towns because there's just either not enough good work to go around, or it's just it's just a crappy place to live. Like there's no vitality to it. And Will talks about that in his book of the county he was living in is one of the poorest counties in the U.S. by income. It is wild. And he said he got to the point where they were having the business was doing so well in the model that it was doing. He was able to start buying houses for his employees to live in. I know, old fashioned company town style, like when you were running a mine or the railroad. Fascinating stuff. But he's able to offer his employees benefits. He's able to offer them housing. He's able to pour this money back into the community in a way that actually matters, and it props up so many people, not just him and his farm operation. It's not just propping up the people who work for him; it's propping up an entire community. He's able to open a restaurant. He's able to open up, like he's able to recycle in ways that like like if you just look at the website right now, I mean, it's just wild. Like, look at this. I mean, shop by most popular: grass-fed beef, lamb, pork, artisan goods, pork, pastured poultry, organic vegetables, farm store for your pets. I mean, it's just like you can visit cabin rentals, book your stay, general store, dining. Like, look at all these things. Like, just look at this. There's so many cool things. And guys, this is a farm. Like, this isn't a tourist attraction. This isn't Disneyland. This is a farm we're talking about. And I just think that's super fascinating. Like, and I think it's something that would be super cool to see in more places. I'm like, man, that sounds fun to me. Not only the getting to farm in a way that's different, but also getting to pour money into a community that might really need it. Guys, I go to a lot of small towns because of my job. A lot of small towns are suffering right now. It's easy to look at the cities and say, "Oh man, kids these days don't want to work," but there's entire populations who are leaving just to go find work in the city because there's nothing in small towns. Farm kids don't want to come home anymore. Not only because sometimes working on the farm can suck, but also because live in a town of 1,000 people that loses 20 to 30 every single year. It's like, okay, by the time he's gone, that town doesn't exist anymore. And he's living out in the middle of nowhere by himself. Like, that is just, yeah, like there's just this wonderful opportunity that I could see taking place in the next decade, 20 years, where these resilient farm models, is what Will talks about, become more commonplace. And rather than having to say, oh, I have to move to a city to find work or find a place to live, it's like, no, I actually work. I might work 8 to 10 hours a day, with my hands, laboring with animals or organic crops. But first of all, it's super fulfilling. If you've ever worked with animals, it's probably one of the most fulfilling jobs on the planet. Taking care of something else's life is so, there's just something about it that it's just weird. And the same comes from growing plants too. There's so much like rich satisfaction that comes from working the land and seeing your labor not instantly pay off, but something that can be months, years for you to see the fruit of. And I think there's just something that, first of all, every human being could really benefit from stuff like that, but also communities can benefit from that. We could all benefit from that. City populations could benefit from having, local farms that can produce a wide variety of goods within a 30-40 minute drive. That sounds super cool. I mean, we talk about that all the time. And once again, I'm not coming in here saying we must get rid of industrial agriculture. I mean, industrial agriculture is going to be around for a long time, guys. Whether you like it or I like it or not, I mean, we need to feed billions of people. And this is and Will proposes this as an alternative, and I think there's some merit to that, but it's very logistically complicated. There's just a lot of like mental labor as well as skill that does have to go into running something like this. And there are a lot of people out there with that skill, that gumption to do stuff like that. With that said, farming thousands of acres of wheat or corn does produce a lot of cheap food really quickly. So, I mean, and I'm not going to say that's the way it has to go. I just don't think it's going away anytime soon. It's just, I think, going to start looking different over time. So, yeah, guys, I loved this book. I mean, I did. I'm probably going to reread it this year. I'd like to buy the actual physical copy so I can like sit down and take notes, because I think, if I ever had the opportunity to start a farm model like that, I probably would. I mean, it sounds fun. Like, as a business owner, I'm like, okay, first of all, get a farm. Love that. I'd get to have cows. I would freaking love having cows again. And I would get to run a fun business, like something that's like, first of all, it's not just benefiting me. It's benefiting a community. It can benefit other people working for me. It could benefit city dwellers. I mean, just having a welcoming place to bring people who don't know stuff about farming, man, we need more of that. And so, regardless of whether you agree with Will Harris or not, you should go read or listen to this book, because, first of all, it's good for you to spend time with people you disagree with. And a 10-hour audiobook is a really good way to spend time with someone you might not agree entirely with. It's good for your soul. You probably just need that. But also, I just think it's something that's super fascinating. At the very least, you'll learn something about something you probably would not have taken interest in. So if you have the opportunity, read it, listen to it. By the way, Will Harris is the guy who's on the Joe Rogan podcast. He's the rancher who's on the Joe Rogan podcast. So that's why he also, he's been a big name for a long time, but he's just someone, if you want to learn more about him, read this book. I loved it. I mean, I love what he has done. I don't love every stance he's taken. But he has done a good job at what he's done, and his farm model is one of the most respectable farms models I've ever seen. I mean, it's super cool. So I'm going to stop saying all that. Guys, go listen to it. Will, if you ever end up listening to this, I would love to have you on the podcast. I mean, this would be super cool. You are a guy who is much smarter than I am and has been in the game a lot longer than I have. And so at the very least, I'm sure I could learn something from you and we could have a fun conversation. But yeah, that's all I got for you guys. Stay safe, stay farming. We'll see you next week.